Hey, it's Benjie Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Alan J. Shular. We're going to be discussing his fantastic book, 50 Missions Over Europe, the Wartime Diary of Lieutenant John Shular, USAAC. That book is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I will say, Alan was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business, Parchment Global Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, well, you already know, you got to move it through Parchment. And you can find out more information on them at parchmentglobalpublishing.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Alan here on the line. Right there in the title, you have an idea of what we're going to be discussing today. 50 Missions Over Europe. So it's a wartime story, but what makes this so remarkable is, guys, this is based on a true story. The wartime diary that Alan is using for this book is his father's journey. So it's his father's words and his direct experience of his 50 missions that he flew over Europe. Now, not only is this going to be an education for everybody involved, because we're going to be talking specifically about the different types of planes, the different wartime missions, and really the criteria that went into it. But guys, what is so remarkable about that is that number 50. Now, I'm not going to steal Alan's thunder. I'm going to let him go, and he's going to be able to articulate it much better than me anyway. But that 50, that number 50 is something that is absolutely astounding. The fact that his father was able to achieve that number and make it out successfully, because that in and of itself, I mean, listen, anybody that's ever been to war, anybody that knows someone that has, the biggest worry, the biggest fear is whether or not you'll be able to come back home and be with your loved ones. And Alan's father not only surpassed the generic criteria, right? The normal amount that people serve, he surpassed it and then some. Now we're going to get down to the very specific experiences, and listen, I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to listen to everything that Alan has to say, because this is going to be an education and a fun-filled journey for me just as much as it's going to be for you. So sit back, strap in, and get ready to embark upon this amazing journey. Now, Alan, before we even jump into the book, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
Thank you, Benjie, for having me.
Absolutely.
This is really important. I want everyone to know what my father had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys only had to fly 25 missions and they could go home. And his number was 50. He actually flew 53 missions, because when he had to bomb like Plessy oil refineries, they counted that as 2. Because usually when 100 planes went out, 80 would not come back. And it was about out of 10 men, 8.9% they said would not come back, either from being captured, just being blown up because of having bombs and fuel in the B-17, or being captured. And one thing I never thought of was the flak. When those shells blow up from the 200 guns firing at you, there's millions of pieces of shrapnel, about 4 inches by, my dad said 4 inches by 2 inches. That was like 370 degrees. He said, guys would be killed just from those going right through the plane itself. And my mom, he had cancer later on in his life, and she thought that was probably from the asbestos. The Navy guys, and that was the magic insulator, asbestos. But when those pieces of shrapnel went through the plane, they were always putting out little fires. It was always smoke, and they were breathing that, and he breathed it a lot like that. So,
Alan,
but first, scary.
Absolutely. I mean, I have chills and goosebumps just hearing you depict that, right? And again, guys, listen, as I was telling Alan on the pre-screening call, just listening to him articulate some of the journey that his father went on, it literally brought me chills. I have seen plenty of wartime movies, as I'm sure you all have as well, but to know that these are direct from his diary, these are direct experiences, it just heightens the stakes, right? It makes it that much more real. Listen, Alan, first and foremost, thank you, because you've already started to go in and answer some of the questions that I wanted to go into. Now, I wanted to start first and foremost with the quota, which you said generally these soldiers they only have to fly, what you said, 20, 25 missions?
Yeah, 20, your quota was 25. Mm-hmm. Maybe you go back to the States and either be an instructor, for fighter planes, or a desk job, which none of them wanted, for sure.
Out of that, out of the 25,
for 20 years.
Right, and that's where I wanted to go. So out of the 25 missions, I know that, again, the success rate is very, very low. But to put things in perspective for our listening audience, the quota was 25 that they had to hit. Obviously, your dad surpassed that and then some. He doubled it. Now, out of the 25 missions that generally was the quota, what was the average amount of missions that people were successful on?
Well, Benjie, you know what? I did some homework here. And I was telling you earlier, the Mighty 8th and the Mighty 15th, they flew together, mostly B-17s and Liberators too. And right here, I remember when I was moving my mom back from Florida after my dad had passed away. She was getting older, and I had a little golden retriever puppy and my Harley in the back of the trailer. And I pulled off at the Mighty 8th. They have a big write-up on the internet, Benjie, and they got a Sabre out there. That was a popular jet during the Korean War. And I just pulled in there, and I went in, and it's really, really cool. It had a whole area of like a library, and then pictures of Hitler. And then I opened up, and they brought me inside, and there's a Mustang hanging from the ceiling. And then I noticed they had the Normandy bomb site where my dad sat, and he was left-handed. And I couldn't believe how good he was at operating that, because it's all for right-handed men, the way you have to, and it was all, he was so good at math. That was the thing. I remember my dad told me he had three things. They had no radar. They had a Mickey ball. They used to replace the Baltic gunner with the lead bombardier plane, but that was later on. It wasn't real accurate. But he said, you got your eyes, and you got your weather, and you got your mathematics, and that's all you could go by. Mm-hmm. And but anyways, when I went in there, I said, "Oh yeah, my dad flew, 50 missions. He actually flew 53, but he got accommodated for a couple more dangerous ones." And these guys are all at that time. That was in 2002, and there was a lot of guys still alive, and they were in there working for free, just running the show. And they look at, who's this kid? What's he talking about? Long-haired kid with a Harley and a dog and 50 missions. And then I said, well, I got my diary. I'm moving all my stuff back and for my mom, and I'll bring the diary in. And all of a sudden, when the guys saw the diary, Benjie, they both started like crying. I lost my brother on the 16th mission, my cousin, you know what I mean? And then all of a sudden, a guy came out in the office and he said, hey, could you wait for an hour? Our historian wants to meet you. And I said, well, I got a little puppy here, and I just bought a new Harley. I wanted to get back home. I said, yeah, all right, I'll hang around. And then we were walking inside, and I said, they had a thing like, when you play hockey with your buddies, having a beer, those hockey games with a plastic dome over them. Well, they had that, and it's older Plestiori fighters, right? I said, no kidding, check this out. And my father had to fly 4 of those. And then he told me a general came in, and there's 10 men that operated B-17, 5 gunners, and 5 officers. And the 5 officers, there's always about 100 planes, so that's 10,000, that's 5,000 men meeting, right? And he says, well, boys, it's going to be a tough mission. I'd like to have a volunteer. And he explained it, that they were going to fly a night mission, because when you go to Plesty, the Messerschmitts, they built a plant right next to there. Also, there's 200 guns firing at you and all this stuff. And they said, we're losing 80 and 90 planes, even with escorts now. With the Mustangs and then Lightnings, the P-38 Lightnings, the P-51 Mustangs, even with the Rolls-Royce engines, they were having a hard time. So my dad wasn't a medal getter, but he always wanted the next thing. He was really hungry. He was just unbelievable. He could play professional baseball, but he said it didn't pay enough. But he was a smart man, but very, very intelligent. And when he put his arm up, see, the pilot was Rocky. He was a medal getter. My dad said, shoot, the medal I couldn't get was a Purple Heart. When a Messerschmitt came in and shot up the nose of the plane, he couldn't see for like 3 weeks. He had glass in his eyes. But anyways, I'm getting off track here, but there's so much to cover that he told me. He filled my head with so much really cool stuff. He was my dad. But getting back to that mission, him and a Jewish man was they were the smartest. I have 100 bombardiers. My dad and him were like the top guys. My dad thought he might have been a little better, but he didn't volunteer. And this mission, I remember my dad, I'll quote this. He said, Alan, I thought I bit off more than I could chew, because remember those 3 things I was telling you about, Benjie, when you had to bomb and make sure you hit your target and not civilian. He didn't have your eyes. And he said all of a sudden, he's like, planes were mixed up, and they were getting close to the bombing site. They fought, and my dad said they lost 4 bomber planes. Like 40 men just were killed from smashing into each other. But then all of a sudden he goes, bang, the Germans, the Nazis heard them, right? And all of a sudden the lights went on. Bingo, he saw it. He said, I thought it was too far, 5 miles right. He says, I'm more 5 miles left. So he got on the horn. He says, pilots banked, 30 degrees at 110 miles an hour, that type of thing. And the planes are so spread out, Benjie, that Plesty was one oil refinery, but they took out 3, because when the oil refineries go up, they go up. And this is in Budapest, Hungary, where Hitler moved in and killed everybody and took over. That fueled his war machine. And I remember one thing, General Patton, he got a lot of publicity and stuff. And his biggest, when he captured Rommel was 10 miles, Benjie, from its fuel depot. This is about 3 months or so later on. And I think my father had something to do with that. But anyways, they when they got back, I don't know, a few days later, they had a big well-to-do thing, because it was such a successful mission, and everything's quoted in Washington. You think the police are on it, the military's right on it, and they handed out, I think it was the Distinguished Flying Cross. I remember I was really young. My dad never talked about medals, so it never came up. And now he's passed on. I got so much to ask him. But my Aunt Mary said he did it for morale. He took the medal off him, and he pinned it on the Jewish man, because Hitler was killing so many Jewish people. This kind of breaks me up.
Right.
But I remember I explained this to a bill collector a few years ago, and his wife was Jewish, and she actually called me up and couldn't believe what my father did. But I knew he would do that. He didn't give a shit about the medal. Oh, excuse me. But, he cared about human life, and I know he did it for morale. But,
absolutely.
But anyways, there's just so much, Benjie. I was telling you earlier about the black pilots, that they were called their little brothers. And the white pilots, their little friends. Because the black pilots did the job and also saved his life. That's a big deal. But his quote was, "It's war, son. I go to kill or be killed."
Absolutely.
And that's what it's all about.
Thank
God we won. Thank God we won. You mentioned your grandfather, Benjie. That generation was the best around. All these people that are rich and stuff, they should just salute every military man. I don't care. But don't forget the ones that made it this way.
Absolutely.
So you and I can talk on the phone, and do a radio thing, because that's just what it is, because Hitler had no plans for us. He had no plans for us. Well, our relatives. But I'm glad he lost.
Alan,
I remember one thing. Well, you know what? Hey, Benjie, I'm sorry. I don't mean to take this over, but there's just so much my father told me. And I remember he said this, though, and I want to quote it, but I said, Dad, if you only had to fly 25 missions, why'd you fly 53? And he said, son, the world wasn't free yet and Hitler wasn't fucking dead. And he didn't swear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was more like a preacher. But that's the way he quoted me. And I can see where he's coming from. That man was an evil creature. I don't care.
You know,
but, yeah, I'll shut up now. I'm sorry.
No, listen, Alan.
Get carried away.
Alan, first and foremost, listen, man, this is your interview, okay? You can talk for as long as you want. I don't even have to say a word throughout it, okay? I have to remind myself because I'm literally getting stuck here, just getting lost in the words that you're articulating. And then I have to snap back to reality and remind myself, oh, yeah, I'm working right now. I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
I'm sorry. These words come out from my heart, through my brain, through my mouth.
Absolutely.
It's just funny.
No, absolutely.
You know, he's my dad.
That's what I love so much about this, Alan. And guys, again, you know what you got to do, right? You can hear the passion in his voice. You know it's coming from such a wonderfully heartfelt place because it's all real. It's all authentic. And we love that. That's what makes it so enticing. Guys, there's no getting around it. You got to go to Amazon. You got to go to Barnes & Noble. You got to pick up your copy of 50 Missions Over Europe, the Wartime Diary of Lieutenant John Shular, USAAC, by Alan J. Shular. It's such a fantastic piece. You can't miss it. You know, and Alan, listen, there are so many questions that we have that we've barely scratched the surface, and we're not going to be able to go into all of them for time purposes. Okay. But guys, again, this is the reason why picking up the book is really what you have to do, because when you go into the book, you're going to learn so much. You're going to learn all about the B-17s. You're going to learn about a B-17E, a B-17G, the different bombers. You're going to learn about specific terms. One term that Alan brought up earlier in the interview was you said it was Mickey, right? Mickey ball that he brought up. Yeah,
a little bit of a radar thing that kind of tried to, I think it went with, not with light, it was metal, but I'm not sure about that. Mm-hmm. It wasn't very good. Like now, a pilot, you know, the F-18 shoots, an enemy fighter, he doesn't even see the guy. In those days, like Ted Williams' days, John Glenn, you saw the guy's eyes. You know what, too? I remember I was telling you about the nose, how this is really a quote I remember my dad said, too. He talked about, I remember I mentioned about a Purple Heart, because you have to put in for that. Yeah. My dad he didn't want his, but he couldn't see. But I remember he told me, he said, I knew that we were winning the war, son, because the German pilots, typical race car guys, you know what I mean? They were great. They could fly in, and he says what they do is, earlier in the war, they'd come and they'd be flying at, say, 140 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour. Then they go inverted, and they go upside down. And then they shoot at you, and that's when the bullets went to the left and right of my dad's head. But the glass, he had to use I think the G was a turret, but the J had twin 50 calibers sticking out the nose. Mm-hmm. And he was sitting there and, firing at him, and he's firing at him. He says, just like someone turning on the headlights of a car, and then he'd go inverted, and he was such a great pilot. Then he'd shoot at you, then he'd fly under the plane, only one gun. And then later on, my dad was saying, the pilots, they were just shooting ducks because fish in a barrel, because then they'd fly up. They couldn't, flying inverted at that speed and then knowing everything's opposite of what you got to do. It's really hard to do. It's amazing.
Absolutely.
And the pilots would fly up, Benjie, and there'd be 10 guns shooting at him per plane. He was going to get it underneath, just shot up, blow it up, hit the fuel tanks. And it's shredded. So I just remember that came in my head, what my dad said. But he never got the medal, and he was happy without getting it. Mm-hmm. I remember that. He didn't really care. But he loved to fly. He was 16, living in a coal mining country, and he hitchhiked to the airport when he was going to college, and he got his pilot's license. I remember that. And, he loved to fly. And he talked about that all the time, like flying over the Alps. Benjie, one thing about, he saw so much in his life, and the major thing is he lived. An average B-17 crew member lived for 6 missions. Okay, that's what you said earlier. It is amazing, that he could just have the time. See, the diary itself is really cool. He came in July 14th, 1943. And he was there for 6 months. That's how long it took him. And at 6 months is when he said that we were either going to kill or be killed. And somehow he survived, Mm-hmm. But what you mentioned earlier, Benjie, too, about there were a number of this one gentleman quoted me. They just did Midway. And Midway was a really cool movie, and they just redid it a few years ago. But I know that was from another diary from a Air Force pilot. And I remember this guy quoted, he said, yeah, a lot of them lived. A lot of them died. You know what I mean? That's what he said. And like my dad, I wanted to let you know, those are my dad's words. They are not mine. I did put footnotes in for people that aren't military, bred or whatever, just for the jargon,
Absolutely.
The flak and shrapnel and just different terms so they know what it would be. The military guys and girls, they'd eat it up because the military war is war, even in them days. Same thing. So,
guys.
But hey, this has been cool.
Absolutely.
You're nice. You're a good guy.
Alan, like I said, man, this has been an absolute pleasure. Guys, again, you know what you have to do. I mean, listen, I could sit here and I could talk to Alan for hours, and we could talk about this. And again, we will barely scratch the surface because there are so many things to cover. Now, Alan is hoping, and I'm hoping as well, that this can be taken and actually put on the big screen because it needs to be showcased to the masses. But it starts with this book. Head on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Make sure you get this. Is a fantastic book. It needs to be on everybody's shelf. Whether you are someone, again, that has enlisted in the military, someone that has, or you're just a history buff. A story this amazing cannot fall away to time. We need to make sure that we have this and we're talking about it. Alan already mentioned this a few times. We started off the interview by saying this. 50 missions when the average person only has to hit a quota, or actually not even the average person, when the quota itself
25.
is only 25, but the average person only lasts 6. He did 50.
Yeah.
That is absolutely astounding. So not only do you get to learn about this remarkable journey, but you get a fantastic education as well. Action-packed, non-stop journey. Amazon and Barnes & Noble is where you have to go. 50 Missions Over Europe is the name that you have to select. Alan J. Shular is the author that brought it to you. Do yourself a favor. You surely will not be disappointed. Alan, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Well, thank you, Benjie, for having me. Appreciate it for my father and for your dad, too.